Hello, welcome to the Tech for Good podcast. We are very passionate about two things, technology and our world. In each pod, we will be interviewing some fascinating people, business leaders, but those with a special interest in solving the biggest issues facing humanity today. Think the environment, think healthcare provision during a pandemic, think global social injustice. If you want to know more about technology's immense potential to fix and transform, then you're in the right place. In this episode, I speak to Jamie Burrows. Jamie is the founder and CEO of Vertical Future, a company delivering hardware and software solutions to the vertical farming sector. With demand for food production increasing with the world's population, this method of farming is seen as the future. It relies heavily on technology, and in the interview, Jamie talks about why data is critical to vertical farming systems. Plus, he tells us how a simple WhatsApp exchange with a friend led him to the industry. But first, I ask Jamie to define vertical farming.
Vertical farming is, it can be quite broad. So essentially, if you're growing something on a vertical wall in your garden, you could determine that as vertical farming, all the way through to growing in a very contained lab-like environment where you're controlling all the different variables, either in stacked layers or on an actual vertical wall. There's another side of vertical farming, and that is what we call controlled environment agriculture, the area that we are actually involved in. It's technically a subset of the wider vertical farming sector. But that, those two sides of the spectrum show you how broad the sector can be.
Yeah, it's an industry that is growing, isn't it? Can you give us some scale of the size of the vertical farming industry?
Well, I think it's difficult to put a number on it right now, but vertical farming has essentially been around for decades, but really over the last 10 years, a lot of which has been driven by growth in the US, the sector's been growing at a pretty significant rate. There are hundreds of vertical farming or controlled environment ag companies in different countries. In the US, obviously, we've seen the most amount of growth with capital raise being the main metric of success. So, recently companies like Bowery have raised $300 million plus, and some of the big investors, including Google Ventures, etc., have been involved in that, and others. Obviously, Amazon were involved in other companies in the US as well. So, Plenty, AeroFarms. So they're the kind of big examples of success based on capital raising. But in many other markets, we're seeing examples of technology developers or creators like us, as well as growers. So a lot of the companies I just mentioned are more so growers, actually physically grow produce and sell it. But also you're getting a lot of innovation across what I would say that the fringe areas, so not necessarily around producing food, but looking at things like nutraceuticals and phytopharmaceuticals, etc. So, but I guess simplest answer is, market size wise, we're on the fresh produce size, we're selling into probably a $1.3 trillion global market. 100 billion of that is probably leafy greens. So, and then on the technology side, that's another sector altogether.
Okay, Jamie, really interesting stuff. And you mentioned a couple of the big tech players there, Google and Amazon. We're going to get onto sort of the role technology plays in this whole industry in a minute. But first of all, what are the problems that are being solved by this method of farming?
We always lead with space as being the lead value proposition for the vertical farming sector. I think some of the basic value propositions are things like non-use of pesticides or herbicides or fungicides. Obviously, in traditional broadacre farming methods, use is pretty rife. So yeah, I think that's an easy one. Food miles is an easy one that vertical farming is solving, because obviously we're growing much closer to end consumers. Transparency, so being able to have more control and a view of what goes into your produce and where it comes from is very, very important, and that we're solving. But yeah, going back to the land use point, our systems, we can grow the same amount as a traditional farm in about 3% of the space. And if you look at what's happening in the world right now, deforestation, a lot of farm being allocated towards agriculture, albeit a lot of it is around beef and not necessarily vegetables. space is going to be more of an issue in the future. And that's where I think vertical farming and other forms of controlled environment ag is really going to have the biggest impact.
Now, tell us more about Vertical Future, your company. What does it do, and maybe how is it different? How is it offering something new in this space?
Sure. So Vertical Future was set up in 2016. We are a technology-driven company. So we design, build, and license proprietary high-tech hardware and software solutions. So we effectively, vertical farming is infrastructure. So we can go and build a project from scratch, i.e., the building itself, or we can go and renovate an existing building and put a vertical farming system in, or we can sell our container solutions. So we've got lots of different solutions. So we sell our systems, and then we license our software out to customers, which are now across the world. And we also have a lot of internal research and development activities. So we've got 3 Innovate UK funded grants, and also a lot of non-funded research activities as well, ranging from seed genetics all the way through to water utilization and breeding and many other areas.
Hello, I'm Daniel Brigham, editor of Tech for Good magazine. I hope you're enjoying this podcast, and if you want more, you can head over to techforgood.net for some compelling and thought-provoking stories, from high-tech insect farms that could solve world hunger to a global mission to counter the spread of COVID-19 disinformation. We've got Tech for Good covered. You can read and subscribe at techforgood.net.
Technology has a huge role here, doesn't it? You mentioned the software there. Tell us about what are the technologies, first of all, and how are these technologies allowing you to do what you do?
So our systems, about 80 to 90% of everything in our company is developed in-house. And we find that to be very important because effectively a vertical farm is a collection of many different technologies. And if you want to be able to scale efficiently, bring the CapEx down for systems and be able to effectively grow food in a sustainable way, but without pushing the price point up, you need to be able to control the supply chain and offer a lot more to customers. So as an example, within our systems, if we break it down, you've obviously got the steel structures, i.e. the actual growing beds where we grow the plants and we have different forms of irrigation. Within our systems, we have both aeroponics and hydroponics, which is, we think, a world first. So it's obviously important to be flexible as type of irrigation needs to correspond to the type of plant you're growing and type of substrate being used. You've then got the lighting. So if we're growing without any, within essentially a box with no natural sunlight, then sophisticated LED lighting is very important. And in our systems, they're proprietary, and we have 5 different LED types that we can combine and deliver lots of different types of wavelengths and levels of intensity. Then you've also got things like sensors, so different types of sensors across the system. So the more automated a system becomes, obviously, the more important it is to know what's going on without having to involve humans. So anything from your basic kind of humidity and temperature sensors, right through to things like fluorescent imaging, where we're looking at the health of a plant in the non-visible spectrum. We also use a lot of RFID tagging, so we create virtual maps of where all of our products are throughout the growing environment. Then you've got all of the other, I would say, we call them auxiliary aspects of a farm. So your seeding machines, harvesting machines, seed treatment, and all the other aspects that aren't involved in that central growing process. So there's a broad range of things involved in a vertical farm.
And such a broad range of things generates, I'm sure, a huge amount of data. How central is data to what you guys are doing? Do you feel like you're using it well enough at the moment? Do you feel there's so much more potential to generate and use even more data?
Yeah, so we've probably spent about as much time and money on our SaaS platform, Diana, than compared to our hardware. It's absolutely critical for our systems. Our systems can run, i.e., as a fallback position without the software, but the software is critical in terms of optimizing the growing environment, optimizing output, and so on. I don't think this sector has really even, it's the tip of the iceberg when it comes to data. There's very little data for different crop types, even being grown outside, let alone indoors. There's very little nutritional data on crops grown indoors, bacterial data, many different things that we're focusing on internally, but I know other people in the industry and research organizations are starting to look at. So for us, as we build more and more farms and we create what effectively is a data network where we're sharing information between the farms, we see that as being the future. And to be honest, we don't even really know how far it could go, and how this data could be used and monetized.
That must be tremendously exciting, though, Jamie. Like, even though you don't know, obviously you'd like to know, but the fact that you don't know indicates that there's a really high ceiling here. The possibilities are surely transformative, aren't they? Even from the level that we're at now.
Exactly, yeah, and I think a lot of people in the industry, from a software standpoint, have focused on very basic elements such as controlling the environment. I think our approach has been to also look at all of the much wider operational aspects and manufacturing components involved in things like safety, knowing when staff come in and out, being able to track a product from effectively when a seed comes in all the way through to a customer. So that involves many different data points. Also people management, CRM integration with different, using APIs to integrate with different financial software. So it's we're really going end to end, not just looking at some of the basic components around plant growth. And I think that's what's required if you want a efficient and profitable vertical farming operation at scale.
And how important is sustainability as well, not just for you and your customers, but also the farming industry as a whole, moving towards sustainable farming? This type of farming has a big part to play in that, doesn't it?
Yes. So I think one of the arguments we use is that if we're able to bring a lot of food production inside, we're able to potentially contribute to improvements in the level of biodiversity outside by reducing pressure on farmland, assuming that farmland is used for good purposes. So I think that's one angle. If you've seen a lot of David Attenborough's programs and the wider research that's been going on over decades now, you'll see insect populations are dying out, soils being degraded. There are many issues. So while some people may look at a vertical farm and say that's a factory, why are we growing food in there? In many respects, we're doing things in a much more sustainable way. I think the issue and where the sector needs to learn is on energy. So depending on where your farm's located and what kind of energy at source you're using will depend on whether or not your kilowatt hours per kilogram of product produced, which is really the main metric that people should be looking at, is good compared to traditional farming. We also go a lot further, so we look at things like life cycle assessments that go all the way back to material extraction and what is the cost to the planet of producing our systems from cradle to grave across a 20 to 50 year asset life. What kind of materials are we using? So the sustainability argument goes way beyond simply carbon. We also need to look at things like chemicals and pesticide use, etc., as we mentioned earlier, human health and the impact of having more sustainable farming methods closer to consumers, and also providing different socioeconomic groups with access to fairly priced, healthy produce. That's obviously, it's quite difficult to quantify, what's the benefit to that from a sustainability standpoint, but it's nevertheless something that we should be looking at.
Do you want to keep up to date with the latest in enterprise, technology, and digital transformation? Visit digitalbulletin.com for news, long reads, thought leadership, and so much more. That's digitalbulletin.com.
Great stuff, Jamie. Now I'm going to change tack a bit. I'm going to ask you about yourself. Now, I'm interested in how you came into this space, a bit about your career. Are you a technologist who moved into this area of farming, or do you come from a more kind of agricultural background? What is your background?
I'm definitely not a technologist, and I'm not a farmer. So I have a very non-traditional background. I left school at 16. I did about 4 years in the US Air Force at the Air Force Academy. Left that, didn't want to actually pursue a career in the military. Came back and got into economics and finance and did about 10 years in different consulting organizations. So EY, Deloitte, also worked in economic regeneration, started a PhD in health economics as well, got really interested in the interaction between health and food and technology, and vertical farming just seemed like a really good bridge between all those. And my wife, Marie, came from a similar background in terms of health and research. And we heard about this or about the sector from a friend years ago, and we thought, we could apply it in an interesting way. So the rest is history.
That's really interesting. Was this a chat in a pub or something, or was this a friend who was working in another industry? How was that? Can you remember that conversation when you first heard about it?
I think it was a WhatsApp, if I remember rightly. I could probably go back, but considering how many conversations we've had since in the last 5 or 6 years, it'd probably be hard to find that conversation.
No, for sure. And finally, Jamie, really, you clearly have a passion for it. Have you felt that passion grow over as you've learned more about the industry, as you've been working in the industry, as you've grown the company and been CEO? How's your personal kind of passion grown, would you say?
I think I've always been passionate about it. When we set the company up in 2016, we bootstrapped it, had very little money. My wife and I had 2 small kids at the time that were 1 and 3, and we had 1.5 staff supporting us. So we really grew the business from nothing. So we had to have the passion and the drive to push it forward. Obviously, in recent years, since we raised some capital and started to actually get a lot of projects and revenues, obviously the team has multiplied, and we should be up to about 60 staff by the end of the year. I would say that the passion is the same, if not greater. You look at things a bit differently as a company starts to grow and you get more people behind you. But nevertheless, this has been something that we've really been committed to since inception.
And what's your personal goal or mission really for the future as CEO of the company? Looking forward, what do you want to achieve over the next 5, 10, 20 years? Like what ultimately do you want to achieve for Vertical Future?
I think we just want to support the people and the planet with having better infrastructure. And our ultimate goal is to improve population health and to reduce food and health-related inequalities. And that's quite a grandiose goal that's quite difficult to prove also from a research standpoint or an evidence standpoint, but nevertheless it's something that we think health should be the health of the planet, and health of the people should be the ultimate goal for this sector, at least we believe.
That was the Tech for Good podcast. Listen, subscribe and rate us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Stitcher.